on the part of these worker committees to try and resolve their issues through the proper channels. And this is very important when we put in the context of the violence that emerges. So we can't go through this, but I've just put it forward. You can see some of the extent of what they were trying to do. They were obviously attempting to negotiate as workers' committees, so they're bypassing coup directly with the post office and directly with labour brokers. They attempted this whole range of official bodies to intervene and do something about their plight, and I'll talk about a couple of those things. I said that they attempted to get help from coup, but once they realised that coup wasn't going to help them, there's a whole series of other unions that they approached to different degrees. One tactic was by several unions, including some officials within coup, but not coup as a whole, to get recognition with the labour brokers, which would allow them to strike against the labour brokers as they can't strike against the post office legally. They attempt to establish their own union in the VAL. They approach a number of political parties and they get help from advice centre, particular Germiston-based casual workers advice office. Now, as I said, this was fragmented. The VAL committee is really fascinating. The VAL committee in 2007, after pestering the Department of Labour, gets a ministerial inquiry into the situation. The ministerial inquiry takes place and it basically tells them what they already know, that they're not employees of the post office, they're employees of labour brokers, they must deal with the labour brokers, and the issue of the fact that they're getting a quarter of the salary of the colleagues they're doing the same work is ignored. The only one recommendation that the Department of Labour Committee says is that TAS, which is the major labour broker that emerges in Gauteng, has failed to provide contracts for their employees and that they order them to do so. Now, TAS never does that. 2 years later, and this is very typical of these workers' committees, they go in waves, they're active, they lull, they move forward again. 2 years later, they pick up on this. And this is a small committee. I've got access to their handwritten minutes. You're lucky if you get 5 or 6 people at a meeting of activists. They then push forward. They go to the CCMA on the basis of this failed promise for contracts and the fact that TAS is refusing to negotiate with them. And they're asking for a certificate of dispute to go on strike. CCMA refuse it. They say it's too complicated. You've got to go to the Labour Court. These guys go to the Labour Court. They get a student from VUT, a student lawyer from VUT, and they put together a Labour Court application, and they get to the Labour Court. Now, the Labour Court is just, you can see it, they just brush them aside. I mean, this is not a great application, I can tell you. And they say, look, you've got to redo your arguments, or we dismiss the case. Basically, they want it out of the way. You've got a month to redo your case. Amazingly, they redo their case, and they go back to the Labour Court, and the Labour Court gives them a date, and the date's important here, gives them a date in September of 2011. They came to the court in April. They never go back to the court as complainants. They end up coming back at the receiving end of interdicts, and this is very critical, because what happens between them first getting to the Labour Court and the date that's set to hear them is the strike of mid-2011, which breaks out. So this is really the rumblings, this was of worker committees that had been attempting to do one-day strikes here and there. Finally emerges as a large-scale strike in mid-2011. Now, it's a strike wave across Gauteng. It has a number of epicentres, but the most important starts in Tembisa. And Tembisa has a very important role in the events that take place. It starts in Tembisa, the most highly organised area, and it spreads out across the East Rand into the Vaal and to other places. Now, the Post Office responds with interdicts, first of all, against the labour brokers, because they're failing to deliver their contract of workers. The labour brokers respond and say, we're unable to do this because we can't get replacement workers in because of what the strikers are doing, i.e. intimidation. So the Post Office then is free to go forward, and it takes interdict against the Workers' Committee. Now, at this point, the Worker Committees get a little bit confused, and they think they're going to Labour Court because of the VAL, and that the Post Office, the VAL case, and the Post Office is on strike, on trial. They turn up expecting to have a good the judge will make a decision about their plight, and of course that's not the case. What the Post Office lawyer does is get the names of the ringleaders, those goes down, and the interdict is against them. They initially defy this, and then they realise they're in deep, deep trouble, because they're facing long jail sentences for contempt of court. And it's a humiliating backdown that takes place. Complicated backdown, and the strike collapses. It's a very big strike. There's thousands of casualties across Gauteng involved. So it's a complete, utter humiliation for them. But what's really critical is they learned lessons. And there's 3 key lessons. The first was they would now conceal their leadership. They would find ways of protecting or concealing their leadership so the organisation would not be decapitated in future. The second was that they knew now that they were not going to talk to the labour brokers, they were going to go straight for SAP. This was the important point. You go for the jugular, and you go and force them. The third one was that they learned a range of tactics, piloted in Tembisa, how you stop mail delivery, so that they knew how they could hurt the post office. Right, so the Mabarete strike, 294. This is a mythological figure. At one point there were only 294 strikers, but there were varying number of strikers over the course of the strike from December to April. I've divided it into 4 stages in the working report. Mobilisation, Soma, which is to hunt, home visits and negotiations. Now what you've got a problem is, how do you start a strike if you're outside of the industrial relations system? Because you can't legally do so. If you don't turn up to work, it's absconding and you're dismissed. So what you've got to do is mutual mobilisation. You've got to get one group of workers to come to your workplace and say, come and join us on strike. And you can then legitimately say, I've got no choice. If I don't come on strike, they're going to beat me up. And you join the strike. Now obviously there's a catch-22 situation. You need a strike before you can start a strike. There's a very nice story in Tembisa where the West Grand come to them at one point and try and put them on strike, and they only send 2 people, and they say, listen, come back in numbers, then we'll join. Yeah, because then we've got cover, we can legitimately say. Now, this is a complex process. This is not, you see intimidation, it looks straightforward, it's not. These are coordinated processes. The workers inside a depot know that a group's coming to take them out. And they've been prepared, and they're basically waiting, and you've got a theatre going on. But you don't have to. You can always just lock the gates and stay hidden if you don't want to join the strike. Or the better tactic is you join the strike for a day, and you go back to work. Because you have to be at work again until the remobilisation process takes place. And you've got to do those skills. So it's your choice whether you join, although in these complicated ways. Right. What's interesting about the Mabarete strike is that their mobilisations weren't really very successful. They were nothing like the previous strike. They get a few hundred workers out. And what they do, contrary to industrial relations theory, is they don't withdraw their labour, they apply their labour. And this is I think it's a really important point. How a small group of workers are able to disrupt a very large operation. If they simply stayed at home, or toy-toyed somewhere, they would have very little impact, a few hundred post office workers out of thousands. So this leads, of course, to the whole Soma. And basically, to get to the point, this involves varying sizes of groups patrolling townships, finding people who are delivering, and it ranges from warning, stripping, to beating. Some of the beatings being very severe. And then it becomes a cat and mouse game with the post office and with the police as to who is going to succeed. And eventually they succeed. And across townships where this tactic can be operated, you can't do it in the suburbs for I think fairly obvious reasons, deliveries grind to a halt across Gauteng. But again, let's put this in perspective. The point here is to get their voice heard. What they're trying to do is to get a permanent position in the post office. They're not trying to destroy the post office, although that's what it clearly appeared like at stages. And so there's other things that they do, which I think helps illustrate that. If we've got time, I'll talk about this very funny time when they went to UNISA to pursue their strike. The reality was, this is a quote from the working paper, that after several months of doing this hunting in the townships, they'd stopped delivery, but they weren't getting anywhere. Because basically the post office didn't really care. They don't care whether your casual workers are working, striking, or an ICU unit, which some of them obviously were. And they were just going to ride this out, seeing it as a group of bandits operating the township, which from some perspective, of course, it looks exactly like that. Now, in desperation, they kind of looked around for things to do, and this strategy of home visits emerged very organically. They only did 3 home visits. But it was a trinity of targets, which is highly symbolic. They went to the home of the mother of the key labour broker in Tembisa. This was the first one. They realised at that point, it was more or less an accident, they were passing, and they made a phone call to the daughter, to the labour broker owner, and said, we're here and we're going to come back, or you get out the post office. And they kind of worked out what to do there. The second one they went to was Clive Burden, senior official in CWU. They went in numbers, and they said, you stay out of this. You know, we see you as the enemy now. This is our strike, and the UK, stay out of it. And the third one was to a senior manager of the post office on the East Rand, E.T. and Piney, who lived in a gated community, and yet they get 200 workers in there to the house. We can talk about how they do these things. So, now none of those key targets were there, but their families were. And it was clearly extremely traumatizing. You know, you've got to call a spade here. People went to counselling, children went to counselling as a result of these visits. But the visit to E.T. and Piney, the third visit, as everybody says to me, it just changed everything. They hadn't even got back to the metro rail station when the phone call comes through. It's brokered through intermediaries. They want to talk. Because basically, the managers now realise that they're on the front line of this industrial war. They know from the whole Solma process that these guys are serious, and their families are now vulnerable. So the negotiations start almost immediately. Now, these guys, sorry guys, but these guys don't know how to negotiate. Yep. What they do know, I mean, I'm not saying now, I'm saying before. They'd learned how to disrupt mail delivery. They hadn't learned how to negotiate. And there's this interesting merger between officials from Sir Powell, which is a breakaway from coup, and they combine forces, so you've got the capacity and the strength, if you like. And there's an agreement, an incredibly difficult agreement, because they're breaking all the rules of the post office on both sides. Coup is the only recognised bargaining agent, so no one should be negotiating with anybody. They've got coup looking down there. So there's an unwritten agreement, which of course causes enormous problems. But basically, it's a victory. All of the strikers go back to work, re-employed now as employees of the post office. And there's an agreement that all casuals be converted. The process is still going on. Okay, does it matter, this strike? You know, the law has changed. There's a well-crafted law, Amendment Act. In theory, it should end labour broking. The point that I think is important is, will it be implemented? We can talk about that. My own view is, it won't be implemented unless workers push in similar ways to Mabarete and how they did it. Oh, I forgot to tell you how Mabarete, I'll leave that one for later because I'm running out of time.
No, but you are running out.
I know, we're almost finished. So, what I spend a chapter in there, based on that conclusion of mine and my prediction, I spend a chapter on looking at tactics for precarious workers. How you protect an under-protected strike, how you mutually mobilise and so on, because I think if you're excluded from the legal system, you have to find ways of having your voice heard. Wider reflections, I think we can leave this largely for discussion. I think that we can understand the current conflicts in SAPO as a result of labour broking, and we can talk through the particular dynamics of how that's happened. New forms of work or organisation, I think it helps us to think about new forms of work or organisation, and when we can combine the worker committee abilities with traditional union structures. And finally, I did say that it's fairly controversial. I put the argument forward that actually, if we frame the problem of one of inequality rather than law and order, for example, that actually the mobilisation of casual workers may be a very good thing for South Africa. You know, it strikes me that the way that we've dealt with inequality up till now has been very problematic. You know, we give handouts and we get dependency as a result. What we've got with casual workers, and this includes the stipend workers in the townships working for the NGOs and for government, is people doing real jobs, but not having real pay. And it seems to me, by bringing those levels of pay up, we'd do a major contribution to removing inequality in a sustainable way. So I'll leave it at that, and I think we'll move to questions. Thanks.
David, thanks very much for a really fascinating presentation. Comrades, it's up to you, but welcome to the post office workers. It's great that you joined us. And I know the traffic is terrible this morning, so I'm sure that's why you were late. And welcome also to the chair of the SWOP board, Jean de Chaux. It's good to see you here, Jean. Okay, so comments and questions. Disagreement, praise.
Oh, outstanding. My name is Trina Masachana. I am from the Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. I'm working there as a community development worker. The input that I'm going to make here sort of praising those who have succeeded in terms of dealing with the labor brokers. But the honest truth is that the praise cannot only just be given to a particular small sector or a particular union, because labor broking, particularly in our country, in South Africa, remains a very critical matter that needs to be addressed. We appreciate that the government has intervened in terms of regulating labor brokers. Labor broking is not an issue that only affects post offices. It's there in government. You have your people under Quest as the most labor broking company that I know as a community development worker. And those wars still need to be waged, particularly by united workers, irrespective of political, affiliation in terms of trade unions. That will be the input that I need to make here. But making sure that the war on labor broking cannot be declared as if it's totally over. And we have to see the implementation, particularly after the State of the Nation address by the President of South Africa, where it has been recommended that after 3 months, people that are working in there, they should be absorbed. And we need to caution